Hi, my name is Ben Burgis, and I'm the author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, and one of the co-authors of Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of Jordan Peterson, along with Conrad Hamilton, Marion Trejo, and Matt McManus, with an introduction by Slavoj Žižek. I also am a columnist for both Jacobin and Arc Digital Media. And if you think I do good work, you want to support it, I have a Patreon. That's patreon.com/Ben Burgis, where for the a level of support equivalent to the cost of a milkshake at the 50s diner in Pulp Fiction. You can get 2 essays a week, and also the Discord, where we do regular Discord office hours, group voice chats, which have been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot from other people on there. But in any case, what I want to talk about today is a column I recently wrote for Arc Digital Media called "The Problem with Libertarian Solutions to Police Violence," because of everything that's been going on with the this sort of unprecedented national wave of protests since the police murder of George Floyd. Of course, the subject of police violence is on everybody's minds. And this might seem at first glance to be one of those subjects where libertarians and socialists can get together, the same way that we sort of do in terms of being opposed to bombings and invasions of third world countries, and thinking that it's absurd that so many people are in prison for victimless crimes, etc. Right? But I argue in that column that's a little bit misleading, and it's setting that up, right? I should say that there are certainly libertarians who write about the problem in ways that are good at diagnosing it, right? So Radley Balco is the obvious case in point here. So Balco, for example, had a good article in the Washington Post recently, where he was breaking down, all of the statistics that show that the usual, black people are more likely to be killed by the police because black people commit more crimes, defenses just don't work, right? Like that's just flatly contradicts the available evidence when it comes to the specific circumstances of police killings, where they happen, etc. Now, of course, being a libertarian, he doesn't get that much into the poverty aspect of the problem. And of course, the problem is a cocktail of racial bias by police, which certainly exists and is a factor in many shootings, but also the fact that militarized policing is a problem in poor neighborhoods, in general, and due to the apartheid history of the United States, black people are more likely than white people to live in poverty. But again, he does, write in a very compelling way about the problem of police violence, and I think he deserves credit for that. There's some other libertarians, like some of the people who write for Reason, are in the same category. Now, lots of libertarians are not in that category. There are lots of libertarians who either haven't deigned to take notice of anything that's happened in the last few weeks, or are mostly focused on freaking out about people smashing store windows rather than police smashing the heads of nonviolent protesters. But again, there are some libertarians who deserve credit for this. However, even though some of them are good at diagnosing the problem, when it comes to solutions, they're all pretty bad. So in the column, I quote different authors, who take some of these positions. But just to break it down in general terms here, we could kind of start with those libertarian ideas about police violence that are merely grossly inadequate, and go to those libertarian ideas about police violence that are horrible and would actually make the problem even worse. So in terms of the stuff that's merely grossly inadequate, a lot of libertarians really emphasize taking various unimportant laws off the books in order to minimize the rate of encounters between police and ordinary citizens. Another thing that a lot of libertarians talk about, Justin Amash, who is, as far as I know, the only Libertarian Party affiliated member of Congress, has introduced a bill to eliminate qualified immunity for the police, in other words, to make it easier to sue them. And finally, another idea that should be, another set of ideas that should be mentioned in this category is that some libertarians, like some of the writers at Reason, have been talking about all the same things that lots of progressives have been talking about as far as banning chokeholds, etc. So let's take those in reverse order and kind of look at the problems with them. So, all right, banning chokeholds, etc. All of that should obviously happen. Right? There's it's an obscenity that it hasn't already been banned everywhere. And places that haven't banned them yet certainly should. And there are lots of other incremental reforms we could mention in the same breath in that you could say all the same things about, right? So let's kind of just let this be a representative example of all of those other reforms, especially the reforms that's possible to carry out on a local level, because it's much harder to get stuff like federal action to ban the sale of surplus military gear to civilian police. So, yes, that should happen. Chokeholds should be banned. Pretty much every other change of rules that you can come up with that would govern how police departments act in these encounters should happen. They're all good ideas. But the problem is they're all severely inadequate ideas, because if the police followed the rules that have already been imposed on them, if the police didn't cover for each other when they broke the rules, and if prosecutors weren't severely inclined to let them off the hook when they break the rules and kill people as a result of breaking the rules that have already been imposed on them, this wouldn't be half as much of a problem in the first place. So saying, hey, we have a problem with this powerful institution with very little meaningful oversight, that's bloated and militarized, that continually gets away with breaking the rules, while saying, let's impose more rules, sort of misses the point. Like, sure, do that too, right? But that can't really be the core of your solution. So working backwards, qualified immunity. Absolutely. It should be much easier to sue the police, and there should be mechanisms, in fact, beyond that, right, to make sure that payouts for lawsuits, happen where possible from police officers who've actually committed abuses and come from the budget of the part of the budget of the police officer, rather than just sort of the buck being passed to the public at large. But that's not going to do much, because when it comes to this, yeah, sometimes in some prominent cases you're going to get, when a case has like the video clip of the police murdering someone has gone viral, then a lot of attention's being paid to it, and you might have prominent civil rights attorneys, representing the victim's family, maybe pro bono. But most cases of police violence never go viral. And of course, the overwhelming majority of victims of police violence live in poverty and can't afford good lawyers. So saying, yeah, we'll make it easier to sue them if you can afford it, kind of misses the point. A good idea, but one that, like the ideas in the first category, just doesn't do much on its own. Finally, there's this libertarian fixation on reducing the encounters between police and ordinary citizens. And again, some of this is a good idea, that if we ended the war on drugs and and made the use of drugs legal, which there are lots of other good reasons to do that anyway, then what a cop thinks he smells, right? Couldn't be used as a pretext to start an encounter that could end up with someone dead. So again, good idea. Here's the problem: that if you think about some of the most famous instances of police violence in recent years, it's kind of remarkable how many of them would not have been saved by doing any of this. So take Philando Castile, who was murdered by the police after he was asked for his license registration, and he told them that he had a gun, right, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. Let them know, right, so it doesn't spook them when they see it. And they started barking contradictory orders at him. So of course it was impossible, literally, for him to follow them. And then that he was shot. Well, again, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. And gun ownership is already legal. That one's in the Constitution. Or for that matter, take George Floyd, a unemployed worker, murdered, choked to death after being accused of passing a bad $20 bill, which again goes to how you kind of can't talk about this stuff without talking about poverty. Well, look, think about the range of libertarians. A lot of people we call libertarians, like Ron Paul and his idiot boy Rand Paul, or Justin Amash, who I just mentioned, are really people who have a mishmash of libertarian views and more conservative, non-libertarian views. So when it comes to, for example, the Paul family's views on immigration, or all three of those people I just mentioned's views on abortion, right? They have some pretty unlibertarian positions. But you think about the really consistent, really principled libertarians, the kind who maybe have that libertarian bumper sticker on their car that says pro-choice on everything. Well, what sorts of laws do they think we should have? Well, what they say is, some of them are flat-out anarcho-capitalists. Reminds me of one of those called Sam Cedar a while back. It's a very funny conversation. You should watch that. But the ones who admit that we should have some sort of state, right? We can't do without a state entirely, will say they want a minimal state, or what's sometimes called a night watchman state. And you say, okay, well, what are the remaining functions of this minimal or night watchman state? Say to prevent force or fraud. Well, what George Floyd is accused of doing is fraud. So I don't think any libertarian seriously wants to make forgery or, knowingly using forged money legal. So what do they even say when they say, well, we'll prevent these things from happening by taking a bunch of laws off the books to minimize encounters? It seems like even by their own lights, you really couldn't do that. Like that you couldn't take everything off that would minimize all encounters. I think the saner libertarians will admit that, for example, you need to have laws regulating driving that indicate, for example, that you need a way to indicate that you're turning to other drivers. But how many encounters with police that end badly start with a broken turn signal? Right? And again, one of the things they think should be a core function of the state is preventing fraud. Brings us back to George Floyd. Really, the problem with this whole libertarian move that to say, oh, okay, there are police killing people and these encounters, they're enforcing various laws, so the solution is just to have fewer laws, we'll have fewer encounters, and there we go, that solves it. And that last part might be uncharitable. They think there are other things. Some of them think there are other things you should also do, but a lot of them really do present this as the core of their solution. And the problem with this move is the same problem as the standard "he was no angel" defense of individual incidents of police violence, where you find some evidence from the past of the person who was killed that they haven't always been law-abiding or whatever, right? And in both cases, the problem is the same, because we're talking about human rights here. Nobody who should be killed, if they're not a direct, immediate threat to the life of others, in an encounter with the police. And that sort of basic democratic demand for full, civic equality, that everybody should know that, that if they have an encounter with the police, it's not going to end this way, that we all have a right to be treated better. That shouldn't just apply to people who were angels or who weren't in fact accused of breaking laws that should remain on the books. It should apply to everybody. And then finally, there are libertarian solutions to police violence that go from being merely inadequate, like all the ones we've been talking about, to just actively horrifying, like privatizing the police. So this one comes in two flavors that I've seen. One, maybe the sort of ANCAP, anarcho-capitalist flavor, is to say, let's just get rid of police, let's abolish them, and that's the way some leftists might talk too. But I tend to think that leftists who talk that way say, well, we should abolish the sort of police that exists now, but I think they say that remaining public safety needs should be met by some sort of publicly owned institution, right? Even if it's very different from the kind of police that exists right now. Whereas the sort of extreme libertarians I'm talking about would say, nope. I quote in the article someone at the von Mises Institute who says, hey, we could just have neighborhood watches and self-organized patrols, and that'll fill the void left by getting rid of publicly owned police. About which I say, ask the surviving friends of Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery whether having mob violence by neighborhood watch and self-organized patrol is an improvement over the current situation, that whether that's something we really want more of. It could sound very revolutionary if the sort of what you're thinking of as like the citizen militias replacing the police or whatever, you're sort of imagining something, halfway in between the Black Panthers in 1968 and Red Guards in Petrograd in 1917. But of course, once you remember that largely white middle-class gated communities would also get these, neighborhood patrols enforcing vigilante justice in such a system, then you can see very quickly how that could actually get much uglier than what we have right now. The more moderate version, maybe associated with those minarchist or minimal state libertarians that I've seen some libertarians advocate, is that we privatize the police in the sense that the city would contract with private companies for police services, or in one case, I saw a libertarian author suggested that we could have charter precincts, like charter schools. So for certain precincts, the city would contract out with private companies, and of course, this is beyond horrifying. It would make the problem about 1,000 times worse. This should go without saying, but just to spell out the point a little bit, think about private prisons, right? And how those are bastions of human rights or not. Or just consider the basic fact that what this would do is it would take away the last lingering shred of democratic accountability to the public that exists in the current system, or really just replace them with neighborhoods or self-organized patrols, and anybody anybody who wants professional security could just hire a private security firm protester. That would take away the last shred, right? But this would take away, this idea of private contractors for policing would take away 99.9% of the very little democratic accountability that exists in the current system. Because if we didn't even have, a publicly owned version of the police, then there's this, we couldn't, maybe they could lose their contracts. Good luck with that, right? But like what you're going to get is even less accountability to the public than you currently have, because this is a private institution. It's taken outside of the sphere of democracy. What we actually need is more democratic control, not less. I obviously support all of the proposals that have been made on the left in recent weeks for defunding, in other words, for really stripping down police departments so they could still do things like answer domestic violence calls, but they don't have time for anything like the nonsense that people are often harassed and terrorized for right now. But again, that's also not enough for reasons that are kind of indicated by that earlier discussion. We also, need to demilitarize them, of course, and we also need democratization. In other words, we need more democratic control, not less. We, should have review boards, maybe even on neighborhood level that can can't just make recommendations like most current review boards can, but can directly make decisions about dismissing officers who engage in police brutality and violence. So again, some libertarians good at diagnosing the problem, but the gulf between libertarian and socialist ideas about the solutions is profound, and you really need to run in the opposite direction from the free market fetishists when you want to find good solutions to the problem.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.